Today on Fear and Greed, Commonwealth Bank announces a bumper profit and dividend. The local share market closes at an all-time high, and plenty going on in Canberra, from help for first home buyers to a promise to save Rex. Plus, the illegal trade in tobacco gets some help from the government, and Italy cracks down on the mafia. Welcome to Fear and Greed Daily Business News for people who make their own decisions. It is Thursday, the 13th of February 2025. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning is a big one, the Commonwealth Bank. It just keeps motoring along, posting a $5.13 billion profit for the 6 months to the end of December. That was ahead of expectations. The bank increased its dividend to $2.25 a share, which obviously shareholders love, and it reported solid lending growth and credit quality, two things that investment analysts love. So that's something for everyone, really, wasn't it?
Plenty of love around yesterday. As a result, its share price jumped 2%. There's always bad news in every result, though, we must say that. And at Commonwealth Bank, expenses were higher, as was investment spending, in part due to inflation. The net interest margin, the difference between what they make on deposits or what they pay out on deposits and make on home loans and other loans, that was stable at 2.08. That's actually fairly high. Significantly, boss Matt Comyn said the Australian economy has slowed, though he said the bank is 80% confident that a rate cut will be handed down next week. That's the good news. The bank has great data on what people are spending and how they're using it. A few things of interest yesterday. The amount of money being put into offset balances almost doubled over the last half. Thought that was interesting. Very low bad debt levels across the economy. That's good news. And retail and hospitality sectors are definitely picking up.
Sean, I'm going to ask you probably an impossible question here, but can this golden run for CBA just keep on going? Because it seems there's been forecasts of the bank's share price topping out for months now, yet it was up 40% in the last year and nearly 8% so far this year, and we're only, not even halfway through February.
I wish I knew. It's a huge organisation. It's now got a market capitalisation of $271 billion. It's about a third bigger than BHP. At some point late last year, we were talking about BHP being bigger than Commonwealth Bank. No more. Commonwealth Bank's about 35% bigger than BHP. It's actually larger than National Australia Bank and Westpac, the second and third largest banks combined. If you look behind the top line numbers, like in mortgages, which is a really competitive market, it's also profitable, Commonwealth Bank is growing. It actually does about 2/3 of its loans itself, not through brokers. So while 75% of mortgages across the country go through brokers, Commonwealth Bank is at about 2/3 on its own. In fact, 45% of all mortgages not sold by a broker end up at Commonwealth Bank. Pretty amazing. On the deposit side, about a third of all Aussies call Commonwealth Bank their main financial institution. I think that's extraordinary. There's 8.8 million active users of its app. And in business lending, it's increased, the number of accounts it has increased by 40%, 45% over the past 4 years. It's still behind National Australia Bank. It seems to be doing well on tech. Matt Comyn will soon be the most experienced bank CEO, but as always, when you get to the top, it's hard to keep going. There's lots of risks around public relations with Commonwealth Bank, particularly with an election coming up. What happens if the economy worsens? That could turn things around very quickly for it. Also, it is extremely expensive. In fact, it hit a new high. Its share price hit a new high yesterday. So on historical standards compared to global banks, it is very expensive. So it's not all upside. There are always risks, but at the moment, it is flying high.
It is just such a fascinating organisation. Now, Sean, last year we worked with our friends at Ausbiz to bring a whole bunch of interviews from business leaders throughout reporting season. We are doing that again this year. Ausbiz is, of course, Australia's leading provider of live and on-demand video. The latest news in Australian business and markets and economy and startups. You can sign up for free at ausbiz.com.au. And immediately after the show, we are featuring an interview with Matt Comyn, Chief Executive of Commonwealth Bank, about everything that you have just talked about. And it is always such an interesting chat to hear what he says about the economy.
Yeah, of course. Very, very, probably Australia's leading businessman right now.
Yeah, I think you're right there. So stick around for that one. It's coming up a bit later on. We've talked about Commonwealth Bank. What's happening elsewhere in markets?
Well, in large part thanks to the Commonwealth Bank, the S&P ASX 200 finished up more than 0.5%, 8,535 points, a new closing high, not far off the all-time intraday high. Industrials also did well along with financials. Commonwealth Bank had a few friends amongst the financials, NAB, Westpac, Macquarie Bank, they all did pretty well. Tech stocks, not so well. A few notables. The share price of Computershare jumped 15% after its half-year profit beat expectations. Suncorp's share price jumped 1.5% after it pretty much doubled its profit, but that's because it sold its bank to ANZ. So that's just a one-off gain. The Aussie dollar's on a tear, Michael, back above 63 US cents. Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Above 63 US cents.
So much excitement in the studio this morning. That came despite US Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell saying he isn't in any hurry to cut rates in the US, and oil prices are a bit higher as signs emerge that sanctions against Russian oil exports are actually working. That helped some of the local oil companies, Woodside, Santos, etc.
A big start to the show, Sean. We've got plenty more still to come. There's a lot going on in Canberra that we need to talk about. We're also discussing black market cigarettes, a mafia crackdown. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there is plenty going on in Canberra as Parliament moves through its second sitting week of the year. First up, Treasurer Jim Chalmers says the government is not considering retaliating with tariffs against the US if it were to not grant exemptions to Australia.
On Tuesday, President Donald Trump said he's giving great consideration to providing Australian steel with an exemption to the 25% tariff he has imposed. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese backed that up yesterday, saying that Mr. Trump gave a very clear signal that an exemption is being considered. However, since that conversation, there have been claims out of the US that Australia breached verbal undertakings on limiting aluminium exports back when Donald Trump was previously president. Now, it's one of his trade advisors saying that. So I think that exemption is well and truly up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot more to come on that one. Also yesterday, Sean, the Prime Minister said he would prefer it if a private buyer emerged for Rex Airlines, but if that doesn't eventuate, the government will step in.
He said that it was important to keep air travel in regional Australia operating. Mr. Albanese said it's not really unusual around the world for governments to have stakes in airlines, though that's not how we do it here. Generally, Rex, which of course is is properly known as Regional Express, went into administration in July last year, owing about $500 million.
The government, Sean, in an effort to woo younger voters, is making it easier for people with help debts to borrow for a home. This is interesting.
So the government's forcing banks to change some of the lending rules. It gets a bit techie, stay with me, but the regulator, APRA, has something called serviceability regulations. So when a bank looks at a potential first-time borrower for a loan, they take into account their ability to pay back, obviously, and whether or not they could pay back if there was a 3 percentage point increase in their mortgage rate. So if they pay 7%, they judge them on a 10% rate. Under these changes, banks will be able to exclude help repayments from that measure. So you've still got to measure against the 10%, but they're going to exclude the fact that if you have any student debts, that you've got to pay those out. So not huge, but certainly will help a lot of younger people get into the home loan market.
Yeah, I'm sure there'd be plenty of people happy about that one. Finally, Sean, this one is really quite disturbing. The Prime Minister has led a chorus of criticism over a video involving two nurses from Sydney in hospital uniform, one of whom threatened to kill Israeli patients and refuse them medical care.
He characterised the video as driven by hate, disgusting and vile. The New South Wales government has said that the pair will never be allowed to work for the state's health system again. We're going to hear a lot more about this one.
Yeah, we certainly will. Sean, let's talk black market cigarettes. This is a fascinating... We talked a bit about this last year. The black market for cigarettes and tobacco appears to be booming, in part because of a government decision to up the excise on smokes, even though when they increased taxes, Treasury said it would fuel illegal trading.
Fascinating story. So in May 2023, the federal government increased excise another 5% on tobacco for another 3 years. It took the increase in tobacco excise over 10 years, from 2013 to 2023, to 282%, according to the Fin Review. Now, a pack of smokes costs about $50, $34 of that goes to the government. Documents released under Freedom of Information laws shows Treasury's advice warned that increasing the prices would actually have a perverse outcome. Rather than increase government revenue, it would decrease it, as incentives to trade in illicit tobacco and vapes would be greater. So that was the advice. Fast forward today. Tobacco excise, we're running at about $9.7 billion in each year. In 2020, it was $16.3 billion. So it kind of proves what Treasury forecast.
And remember, this was having a big impact on businesses as well, because we were talking about Viva Energy last year, which licenses the Coles Express brand and the Shell brand and everything. And they were talking about the impact on the convenience store sales, and they actually revised down its outlook on the back of softer retail conditions, but actually pointed out that the boom in illicit cigarettes was harming the business. So this is something that isn't just being seen in the kind of the tax take, but is also affecting private companies as well.
God, you've got a good memory.
Yeah, I did this as a sleeper story on the weekend edition. So I did a lot of extra research into it. And anytime I can bust out my old research and get a second crack at the story, I will do so. Sean, AGL Energy is investing in battery projects over the next 18 months as it looks to manage increasingly volatile electricity prices due to coal plant closures and increased usage of renewables.
It's aiming for another 1.4 gigawatts of storage in New South Wales and Queensland. The company supplies about 4.1 million customers. It posted better than expected profit, sending its share price higher. In fact, it hit a 4-month high yesterday. While AGL isn't saying how much it's going to spend on batteries, it said the cost of the devices have fallen, along with the tumbling price of lithium. Now, the growth of renewable energy into the grid has triggered big swings in wholesale power prices. So you can actually get almost negative prices in the middle of the day when there's excess amount of power. And then it spikes at night. It can be like 200 times the average price. So that's what they're trying to address. Those changes have opened up an opportunity for grid-scale batteries, which can store power when it's cheap and release it when demand and prices are much higher.
And just quickly, Sean, one of Australia's biggest gold miners, Evolution Mining, is rewarding shareholders for a much higher price of the precious metal, tripling its half-year dividend. That's not something you get to say very often.
No, that's because its first half profit quadrupled, so 6 months to December, and that's in large part to gold hitting $2,900 an ounce. Not bad. The group plans to mine 780,000 ounces of gold this year. Its share price was up 2% yesterday, 31% this year, 110% in the last 12 months. That's what a higher price of gold does to a stock.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, turning to international news now. And Sean, there's almost too many stories out of the US and the Trump administration to go through them all. So let's do an abridged version. Elon Musk, how about this? He denied leading a hostile takeover of the US government, and he was defending his cost-cutting plans as he made a somewhat surprise first appearance at the White House on Tuesday. The world's richest man took questions from reporters in the Oval Office as he stood next to President Donald Trump. And if you haven't seen the pictures, you should see it because he's there. He's standing there. Donald Trump is sitting at his presidential desk, and Elon Musk's 4-year-old son was actually playing on the floor between them. It's just something that you don't see very often.
No.
And he admitted to being incorrect in some of the things that he says, but broadly described sweeping government cuts as, quote, common sense measures that are not draconian or radical. It seems as if you have to kind of point that out kind of thing, and all of a sudden people are just going to zero in on those words, right?
Yeah, maybe that's in the eye of the beholder. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has again insisted that the US will take control of the Gaza Strip. He was talking after he met with Jordan's King Abdullah. Now, King Abdullah has rejected the proposal. In related news, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned Hamas he will end the ceasefire in Gaza and resume fighting if the Palestinian group doesn't return hostages by Saturday noon. Mr. Netanyahu said he'd ordered Israeli forces to amass inside and around Gaza in response to Hamas's announcement that it was postponing freeing more hostages until further notice.
And finally, Sean, Italian police have arrested 160 members of the Sicilian mafia after wiretaps revealed moves by crime families to recruit a new generation of foot soldiers and recreate their once powerful ruling council.
I did not know that the mafia still existed. The crackdown came after wiretaps of recently freed mafia bosses also intercepted their complaints that Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's government wasn't allowing them to communicate with some of their still incarcerated colleagues. On X, the PM Meloni wrote, "Organised crime is in trouble. The fight against the mafia has not stopped and will not stop." End quote. The mobsters terrorised Sicily for decades. Harsh crackdowns in the 1990s, early 2000s seriously weakened them in that region. Many of the top bosses died or were imprisoned, according to the Financial Times. After decades on the run, the group's most wanted fugitive, the Godfather, Matteo Messina Denaro, who was arrested in 2023 at a medical clinic in Palermo. He actually died in prison a few months later, but it just sounds like they're regrouping.
Yeah, what a story. All right, there we go. Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview, working with our friends at AusBiz to bring you that chat with Commonwealth Bank CEO Matt Comyn. Definitely worth a listen, so stick around for that one. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Thursday, the 13th of February, 2025. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.